we're going to start. This is below me is Steve Magness, who is someone I have admired for a long time because uh, he's smart about a lot of the things I'm interested in. I guess selfishly. So Steve is an author and a writer. If you don't know of his work, his book "Do Hard Things" is one of my favorite books. If you have not checked it out, you need to check it out. He has a new book, and obviously it did well. Anytime you see the title of your old book on your new book, folks, if you need it, that means that it did well. They don't put my old books on here because it didn't sell. See, when you can say national bestseller, that's a good sign. So Steve's new book is called Win the Inside Game, and we're going to talk about this. But I loved Do Hard Things. And Steve just writes a lot of really, really interesting things. He writes on Substack at The Growth Equation. You can follow him there. Steve, I have a ton of questions I want to ask you as like a fan of all your work. And this will not be for people who are asking. This will not be particularly political in any meaningful way. I'm fascinated with sort of sports and masculinity and youth sports in particular, and sort of how we motivate our kids. So I want to start, though. I say all that, and then I'm going to start with a quote because I thought of you when I saw this. Let me read this. So J.D. Vance, who is the Vice President of the United States, for people who are unfamiliar, said this today. He was speaking at this conservative political conference. Here's what he said. Our culture sends a message to young men that you should suppress every masculine urge. My message to young men is don't allow this broken culture send you a message that you're a bad person because you're a man, because you like to tell a joke, because you like to have a beer with your friends. Okay, now I don't need you to, Steve, I don't need you to take sides, JD, but I am interested because I do think we're in this moment where masculinity, or muscular masculinity, I'll call it, is kind of in, right? There was sort of a time where that was a little less so, but I remember I would go to Trump rallies and there'd be his head superimposed on like a Rambo body, or you know what I mean? Like, and Trump is very much like, let's kick the crap out of them, and like these protesters deserve what they get. Like, there's this whole idea of like being tough, which is like kind of like I'm 48, my dad's generation of masculinity. And now it's kind of back. Like, how do you've written and talked a lot about this. I'm fascinated by kind of what's your reaction when you hear something like that from JD Vance?
Everything works in cycles, Chris. That's what happens. We swing one way and then we come all the way back to the other. And I think what we're seeing is that. I think, to zoom it back out, when we look at masculinity, for instance, we know that like men in particular need like more what we call like significance, or this feeling of significance.
Yep.
And one of the reasons of that is like if we look at hormonally, testosterone, which is often thought of like, hey, this makes us aggressive and risky or whatever have you. But what it really is it's the hormone that goes up and down when we get like a hit of significance. So when we win something, testosterone generally goes up. So if we win a sporting match, we get a boost of testosterone. Why? Because we feel good. We're like, hey, I'm capable of something. I did something.
Yep.
Okay. But if you look at getting that kind of significance, there's three paths, psychologically and biologically that it occurs. We can get it through dominance, right? And dominance, if we take that, it's like the alpha male. It's totally. The chimpanzee out there. I'm going to battle to become the leader of this tribe, this pack.
That's David dominance. Goggins, right? Yeah, like David Goggins, like, Goggins. Stay hard.
Yep, exactly. But what research tells us is we can also get it through two other paths. And they're prestige and virtue. Prestige is kind of like mastery, meaning you might not be, the strongest, but people respect the hell out of you because you have mastered some subject or mastered something. Maybe you're the fastest on the block and you're really skinny, but guess what? You're going to get that hit of significance because people realize that's really hard to run that fast. You got it. Or similarly, if you are that, math nerd, whatever, people are going to respect the hell out of you because maybe like you're able to do it. And the last one is the most interesting to me, but it's virtue, which is essentially being a good, decent person and expressing that out to other people. So it's helping other people. So to take it back to ancient, human man's on the savannah, it was the person who stepped in and helped people no matter what. And what you see when you look at masculinity is, I think what we're seeing this return to, like, dominance is the only way. It's JD Vance. This is what we want.
They got to drink beers and crack off color jokes. That's what it means to be a man.
Right.
Generally kick ass.
Right, exactly. And
yeah.
what research tells us is that's one path. And to a degree, it can work, but it has a downside, right? And others have some downside as well. But the downside on the dominance path, and again, we can take this to our cousins, chimpanzees, monkeys, all that stuff, is that the alpha male who is too dominant, generally research shows, has a very short reign because he pisses people off.
Yeah.
And somebody who has a little bit of dominance, but also maybe that virtue, who gets value by bringing coalition together, by showing other people they're important, etc., overthrows them. And those people who generally combine, or those chimpanzees who combine the best,
yes,
generally have the longest reign.
Right, which, I mean, it totally makes sense. It's like, I always, and people always draw this comparison with Trump. And again, I really don't want to spend too much time on politics, but it's like, a bully, if you're bigger than other people, you can kick the shit out of them if you want to. I mean, like, that is an option. Like, just in terms of like raw physicality, if I'm 6'4" and there's a 5'2" guy who weighs 100 pounds less than me, I'm likely to be able to physically assert my dominance over him. I mean, it's just like law of the jungle or whatever. But bullying, you said sort of a short ramp. It's like bullying has its limits, right? Like, you can bully people and it will work in the near term. You will, I guess, get that, like you said, that hit of testosterone. But like, as a medium and long-term strategy, it's harder for me to see that working, right? Because no one is like, man, that guy who bullies the hell out of me, what a good friend. Do you know what I mean? That's just not how, it's like, not, I mean, if it does, you have some like deep psychological issues, but like, that's just like not how it works, right? So it makes sense, right, that a combo of those three things that you're talking about is your ideal, as opposed to like, might makes right, I'm just going to take what I want. Because eventually, in theory, right, you will meet someone who is bigger than you, who is stronger than you. And then what do you do?
Exactly. And that's it. And you can pull this out of, we're talking generally politics and men, but you can see the same thing when we look at coaching sports. So if you look at the best leaders of coaching sports, the cheap and easy way to kind of quick success is being that authoritarian, disciplinarian, like,
yes,
dominance.
Bobby Knight.
Yes, Bobby Knight. But
yep.
if you look at the data, like, those coaches or those teams often can reach success for a while, but then there's either massive turnover and they have to rebuild, or like the team just implodes. And
yep.
what you see from the data on coaches at the elite level is generally the ones who do it really well at the long time are more like, Pete Carroll and others who are just like, hey, like, yeah, we've got this leadership, like, I'm an authority figure, but I'm also here to help you get better, because they bring the same kind of qualities
Correct.
in there. And
right.
that's what we see, whether it's sports or leadership in life. And I think too often, especially nowadays, is like we go for the cheap, fast version because, like, we all want
cheap and fast.
That fast.
Yeah, right. I always say, like, there's a reason fast food's popular. It's cheap, fast, and it fills you. It makes you feel full. It serves a purpose, even if you know it's bad for you. Can I take one step back, Steve, for people who aren't as familiar with you? Can you tell me, like, I'm always fascinated in like people's origin stories, like how they came to be interested in this. I do want to talk more about what we just talked about, and I really want to talk about youth sports. And you put something on your Substack, which I think is, I'll quote a little bit from, about Youth Sports Manifesto. But tell us, just walk me through sort of how you, a runner by training, like, how did you kind of get to a point where you were like, I want to look at masculinity. I want to look like sports, coaching, and brain chemistry. Like, how does that all get together? How do you make it? I'm always fascinated how you make a career out of like your interests.
I mean that's my guiding light is I want to follow interesting things and
Yes.
not necessarily pigeonhole myself in one thing. So I think and I think honestly that's my skill is my ability and it hopefully it comes across in my writing, but is to pull threads from different areas of life and research and stuff and blend them together. So how did I get here? It's pretty simple. Is you mentioned I was runner. I was really fast runner when I was young. I was when I was in high school. I ran a 401 mile. I was number one in the country, the high school star, and then I just never got better. And
Yes, I remember you talking. I remember reading you talking about this. Yeah.
so that right there is my origin story because like what it did is I didn't care about school at that time or reading. I never read books, didn't do anything. I just was running until I never got better. And then that pushed me to understand these things. So I started following interest and at first looking at kind of science and physiology of like training and coaching until I realized like no, the real gold is like the way we get in our own way is like the mental side. So
Yes.
let's explore that, and that's what set me down this path at first of like very narrowly of like I'm gonna help runners. Once I retired as a runner, like I'm gonna help runners get better, and then it became like I'm gonna help athletes get better, and then I started this writing career as a way to like get these ideas out, but more so to realize that performance is performance. So whether we're
Yes.
talking an athlete stepping up to stage, entrepreneur giving a pitch, a doctor, doing surgery, or even a politician, like it's all kind of the same thing. Like
It's performance.
it
It's I
is.
always say to people, it's performance. Like, um, I was watching. You know what I was thinking? This we forget. I think our athletes and our politicians and our celebrities are humans. Sometimes I was watching the vice presidential debate between Vance and JD Vance and Tim Walz, and like I was so reminded of like Tim Walz was so clearly extremely nervous. It made me. I was reading. So I did a quick plug. This is excuse me. This is Steve's new book, Win the Inside Game. In the beginning of this book, Steve talks about choking, like the idea of like people choking. And I was reading it and I was thinking because I was watching Walls and I was like, the guy's the governor of a state. He's the vice president, but he's like clearly like nerd. I mean, if you go watch, folks, go watch the first 5 minutes of that debate. He doesn't know what the hell he's doing. Like he is like blinded, but to quote Bruce Springsteen, blinded by the light. Like he is like overwhelmed. And I thought, my gosh, like we forget they're people. And their brains are victimized by the same struggles that ours are. Like when I was reading the choking thing in the book, I was thinking the exact like it happens.
No, that's exactly. I remember watching that and thinking the same thing. Like, oh man, he's like in it, and if you look at it, it makes sense because when we're stressed, right? Stress can help us perform if it's a little bit, but if it goes too far, what it does is
Totally.
it overwhelms us. Our brain literally kind of shuts down like the thinking, the understanding part, the part where we can pull those stories or ideas from our memory. And it goes into like, oh my God, how do I survive this one moment? I can't pull out what I need to pull
Yep.
out to say it. And that was Tim Walz. And it's
It
no
was. It reminded me too of Ted Cruz. Excuse me, Rick Perry. I'm thinking of the wrong Texan. Rick Perry in 2016, where he says, "I'd get rid of 3 departments right off the bat." He lists two, and he just can't think of the third. And you see his brain legitimately just like locking up, like because once you can't think of it, then you're like, "Oh God, this is bad. This is bad. Oh, this is bad," and then you're never going to think of it. And it reminded me of the same thing. It's like that's why when I'm on TV, I never say I'm going to give you 5 reasons why something's going to happen because I'm like, well, if I only remember 4, I look like a jackass. I might as well just say 4, and then and don't pre-plant the idea that there are 5. But it's exactly what you're saying. Like how I always think people always say like, why are you interested in sports and politics? I'm like because there's so many performance, how you take your natural abilities and turn them into more. or less, or the personalities, the history. Like there's so much intertwined there, and I think understanding one helps us understand the other. That's why I love your stuff so much, because it's not like, yes, you started in running, then you moved to athletes, and now you're broadening it out, because of course you are, because that it's really about human nature. It's not about like a specific profession.
Right, because at the end of the day, it's like our human instincts and our human biology and our human psychology. Because all of these, we're just talking about stress. Stress didn't originate to get me ready for a game or to get ready on stage to give a debate,
Right,
right?
right.
We had those reactions, to escape the tiger, lion, whatever, and
Correct.
we've just used them now for the game, the performance, the standing on stage. And I think this is what you're getting at. And it's funny too, because in my life, my family life actually mirrored this. So growing up, I was the state champ athlete. My older brother was like the state champ in like geography slash history, and
Yep.
he's like, he's known, but he's like went down the rabbit hole of politics and his economics, and he does all sorts of stuff like that. I went down in sport. And then when once we, became adults in our fields and started talking, we're like, oh, we're talking about the same thing.
It's the
You're
same
just like
stuff.
way
Yeah,
over
yeah, yeah.
here and I'm over
Totally.
here.
I see it all the time. It is remarkable. That's why, I'm so glad you said, you follow interesting things. That's kind of how I feel. Like, when I started this Substack, obviously I was writing about politics, but then I started writing about my life and getting laid off and like being a dad and youth sports and other stuff that interested me, because it's like no one is that narrow. Number one, like we contain multitudes, to quote Whitman, and then also like I think that there's so much similarity, right? Like what people deal with to succeed in media is not dissimilar to what they take to succeed in athletics or politics, or like it's all performance based, and like how do we show up and how do we manage our mental chemistry at some level.
Absolutely. One of the times this had like a light bulb moment early in my career, I had the fortune to uh, interview and talk to for a long time a guy named Matt Billingsley, who is still the drummer for Taylor Swift. And I was asking Matt, I'm like, just I have no idea. I have no music talent whatsoever, zero. Um, so just walk me through like how you get ready to perform on stage in front of
Right.
tens of thousands of people and not screw up with the biggest star counting on you. And he just starts walking me through his routine and how he gets mentally right and all this stuff. And I'm like, dude, you could be telling me how you get ready to run a race, because it's it's the same kind of things just applied to a different field, right? It's like getting my body right, getting my mind right, having the right routines to like get in the mental headspace, making sure that I'm reminding myself that like I have some evidence of confidence that I can
Yes.
do this, right?
Demonstrated record of success.
Right. You have that record of success, because no matter who you are, those doubts and insecurities are going to come into your head, even if you've done it a million times. And I think this is often there's two mistakes people make, especially performance, but you can see it in politics too, is that like either they over prepare in the minutes leading up to it, right? And they put too much in their head. They're reading their notes over and over
Totally.
again.
Joe
And
Biden. Joe Biden in the first debate.
it's
Too
Joe.
much. Too many facts.
Yeah, too many facts. And what happens is you can't flow, right?
No.
Or what they do is they go the opposite way and they don't prepare enough. And then they just kind of like don't have a routine to get their mind right. And then the lights come on and your brain's like, what the hell is going on? I was just gonna
Right.
give a simple speech or talk, and it's like we didn't expect this. So in whatever field it is, it's marrying that like appropriate expectations and preparation for the actual demands you're gonna face.
So this is going to get me to youth sports in like a weird way, but one thing that I always think about, and you have written and talked a lot about this, is, and I'm just interested in your sort of perspective, because I think of it all the time. People always say to me, who's the best natural politician you've ever seen in person? I always say Barack Obama because it's not, and I say this has nothing to do with like that he was a Democrat or is a Democrat. I said it's just someone like naturally very gifted at things that are of value in the political space. It doesn't mean that there aren't people who have seen. I mean, Richard Nixon is a classic like example of like a grinder, like not great physical natural gifts. He's not particularly good looking. He's not particularly charismatic, things that we associate with succeeding in politics. But he succeeded too. How much, this is like my nature versus nurture question, how much is success in a field natural ability, and how much of it is training? And by training I mean physical repetition and smart training, mental training, confident, like how do you, and I know the answer isn't like it's 62% this and 38% that, but like how does that work in your mind?
So here's I'm going to give you the cop out answer, but it's the reality answer. Okay.
Okay.
It depends entirely on the task you're taking on. So the more simple the task, the more natural ability comes in,
Yes.
right? The more complex the task, the more training kind of comes in. But regardless of what it is, here's how I like to see it: is you need enough natural ability to get you in the club. So
Okay.
I'll take you in running, for example.
Yeah.
In running, you need a high enough what we call VO2 max, which is a fancy word for your heart pumps enough blood and oxygen. You need a high enough to get in the club of potentially being great. But once you're in the club, whether you have well pulling out random numbers, a VO2 max of 70 or 90 doesn't doesn't predict the race performance once you're in that club of talent. What?
Okay, but can I stop you there and talk
Yeah.
about Steve Magness?
Yeah.
You said in high school you were the number one rated miler in the country. That would suggest to me you were in the club. Yeah, like because you weren't me, where I was like feeling like I'm gonna die when I run a 400, right? Like just like finishing fifth in like my junior high school. You were at an elite level. So doesn't that contradict what you're like? Explain to me why those things can coexist.
Yeah. So here's why it coexists, because I got in my own way. Because,
Interesting. Okay.
okay, I was in the club. I had the talent to go far enough, but I didn't because I made the mistakes. And this is where the mental game comes into it and the training. I had the physical training down, right? But I doubled down on it, meaning I was obsessed with the running. I went further in and trained more and more and more and neglected everything else. And what happens is like running essentially became life or death in terms of like I either win this race and I validate myself, or if I lose, it's like an existential crisis. And I was performing out of that place because I had this notion of if I wanted to be the best, I had to be single-minded and obsessed and nothing
Yep.
else matters.
Yep.
And what tends to happen is that idea proliferates, but it's actually for 99.99% of people, it's wrong because it makes you fragile because it's life or death every time you step
That's right. The stakes
onto the
feel
start line.
so high.
Yes.
Yeah.
So there's so much of the burden on you. So the reality is if I would have, stepped back and said, "Hey, I'm going to have a beer every once in a while," I probably would have reached a higher level
That's
because
fascinating.
so like this is the fascinating part of performance is we need the talent, we need the hard work, but we also need to be able to like make sure that like the hard work doesn't get in our own way, meaning like sabotaging us mentally so that like this thing is the only thing and we get into this like win at all cost mindset.
So what do you make of the 10,000 hours thing then, which would seem to suggest for people unfamiliar, it's basically like if you put in enough time to mastery, you can succeed in things. A lot of people cite chess, for example. You can create a grandmaster in chess if you put this a kid in this situation enough times with the repetition and the correct training. Does what you're saying, are you against that, or am I missing a nuance?
So training will always improve you. But I think the 10,000 hour rule misses a lot of the nuance here, which is like in most things, again, chess is a different thing than most attributes because
Right.
it has rules, and those rules are relatively simple, and you can teach most people, again, depending, like, there's a lower baseline of intelligence you need to master those rules, and if you train enough, you can get at a very high level. Okay, most things aren't like that. You can put 10,000 hours into training and you will get better. Absolutely. But will you become a master, national
Right.
class, world class? Absolutely not. Like,
Right. Elite. Right.
elite. You need a little bit of both to do it. And I think the misnomer on this is like, and this, we know this intuitively. Like, we need to marry, going back to interest, we need to marry something that we're interested in, passionate about, and have some baseline of talent. And when we get that magic there, that's generally when you find, hey, I'm going to be pretty dang good at this if I
Yes.
show up every day.
Yes. Okay. Um, so I want to talk about youth sports because it's a thing that I've been sort of passionately involved in. My 15-year-old plays very high level soccer. My 12-year-old is still 12, but is into sports. Um, I was thinking of you actually this weekend because I stupidly volunteered to coach my seventh graders rec basketball team. Now, the stakes could not be lower. I mean, yeah, like the level of basketball, like I always say after each game, like I feel like we may have set back the cause of basketball just generally a number of years based on what we did. The score is usually like 40-27 or something. It's not right. Okay. And yet, over the weekend, the commissioner, poor guy, it's like a volunteer position, like all these jobs, he had to send a thing out that was a reminder to the adults, the parents, and the coaches of their behavior because there had been a number of incidents of yelling at the referees. A coach in the league had been thrown out of the last game. And I remembered back to the draft, and you're in a room and they say, all right, so we've got a parents' code of conduct, a coach's code of conduct, and we've got the kids' code of conduct. And I remember this guy saying, to be totally honest, like, we've never really had to issue with the kids' code of conduct. It's the parents. And I was like, well, this just affirms that adults are ruining or have ruined youth sports. You wrote, I love this piece, and I just want you to walk through the piece, and then I want to talk more broadly about it. But folks, if you are at all interested in this topic, Steve wrote a piece called on the Growth Equation newsletter, which is his Substack, called "How to Save Sports: A Manifesto." Can you talk about number one, how you got interested in youth sports, and then number two, what's wrong and how we fix it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I got interested because for a long time, I got my start coaching high school cross country and track. And then I coached college cross country and track for a while. And what I kept realizing and seeing was we'll call it the combined nervousness and apprehension of parents, and also some of the crazy stuff that they did. And again, we're talking cross country and track. This isn't football and basketball.
Correct. These are
Okay?
not rev sports in college.
Yes, right. You're not becoming a multimillionaire if you're a great miler, whatever have you. But here's what happened is, like, there were some crazy stuff, and I saw it reflected on the kids. I had kids who would come up to me both in high school and college who would say, "Hey, can you talk to my mom or dad and maybe tell them not to show up?"
Yep.
Because they
Yep.
were so nervous that their parent would lose their mind in the stands, and that made it where they couldn't perform. And then I coupled this. So my wife is an elementary school teacher, and every once in a while she'd get invited to little Johnny or
Of
Susie's
course.
baseball, soccer, whatever, and I'd tag along, and it blew my freaking mind. At, again, sometimes 7-year-old, 8-year-olds, the
Yep.
parents yelling at these poor refs who were teenagers themselves.
Totally. They're like 15. They make like $10 to do the game.
Yeah, and they're just losing their mind. And what I realized is that after looking into it some more, I was like, we got a problem, and it turns out it's a major problem because
Huge.
some of the data, again, is just crazy. It's 70% of kids quit before the age of 13 in sports. 65% of kids who play youth sports have a strong fear of failure that was instilled by a parent or coach. It's something,
65%, two
yeah,
thirds.
yeah. And it's like I could go on and on, but essentially what happens, and if you look at it, is kids feel this like pressure, burden, instilled as fear from like disappointing mom and dad, or mom and dad losing their, losing the shit on the sidelines,
Yep.
and it takes them out of the sport, which I think, if we look at sport, I think we need it now more than ever. We talked about masculinity. Boys, like, where do they develop some of their connection, belonging, significance? Often sport. And
Yep.
I think
Absolutely.
when we look at, physical health, how do we instill long-term health? Sport, right? Love of sport, so that,
Totally. Lifetime, being active, moving your body in space.
right, exactly. And then more so, when I started looking at it, and I'll go through this quickly, is that like the anxiety around parents like wanting to say, it almost came from twofold: is they want their kid to succeed, they wanted to get that scholarship. Okay. But if you look at the data on what allows kids to flourish and use sports, it's like the opposite of what we're doing. So there's several studies, but one of my favorite looked at over 6,000 athletes who made it to world class in a variety of sports, from like
Okay.
soccer to Olympics to, baseball. And what they found is those who made it to world class played more sports when they were younger, meaning they diversified. Okay.
Yep.
They started their primary sport, the one that they got great in later. They accumulated less overall practice, and they initially progressed slower. If you looked at the ones who got decent when they were young, got pretty good, but they didn't make the jump, they started their primary sport earlier, they specialized earlier, they did more organized practice, they made quicker initial progress because they were doing an organized practice,
Yep.
and then they burnt out. And to
I mean,
me,
it's just one of the. I want to just pick one quick thing and make a point on one of the things I'm so fascinated by. I live in Northern Virginia. It is a very affluent area. These people, by and large, not everyone, but by and large, these people can pay for their children to go to college. They really can. It is not a either you get a scholarship, and I know this is a reality for many people. It is not a reality where I'm from. You, this kid will go to college no matter what, and yet they are still obsessed with the scholarship and it's very my wife was a division 3 field hockey coach at Catholic University for 20 years. They're still so obsessed with the division 1 thing, even if it's a crappy fit and they don't even get any money so that they can say division 1. And I think, is this about the kid or is this about you bragging to your friends? Like, it's exactly what you said. It's like we're doing the opposite of what can succeed.
you're spot on, and it is, most of this is driven from anxiety and insecurity from the parent.
Yes.
Is they want to say my kid has accomplished A, B, and C, and I'm going to do it. And I saw this even from well-meaning good parents who, when it, for whatever reason, sports transformed them, and they wanted to tell their kid, hey, or everyone else, my kid went to D1 university, and
Yep.
this is it. And I'd sit there and look at the kid and I'd be like, you know what, like, you're getting zero money, you're interested in XYZ major, which we don't
That they don't
have,
have, right?
right? Like, you're better
And you're
off.
probably not going to go pro. And even if you, I mean, I know the soccer world, right? And it's like, okay, let's just say your kid winds up making it in the sense that they go pro at some point. How much do you think like the average professional soccer player is paid? It ain't $40 million, people. It's probably $30,000. Maybe that might even be high, right? You're playing in like the fourth league in Hungary, right? And it's like, so what are we solving for? You know what I mean? Like, what? That's like a win, right? Your
Yes.
kid becomes a professional athlete, but to what end?
This is the, it's a complete misunderstanding of the system, and I think most people don't get it. And it's all about, again, we come back to that significance or status. To me, it's all about the like parent status of like, this is what it is. But I think even more so. So I talked to a good friend while writing this piece who was a track runner, but NCAA champion, went professional, just barely missed the Olympics. I think was like fourth or fifth at the Olympic trials when top three go. And she made this astute conversation because like a lot of her friends are like also former professional track athletes and
Yep.
runners and stuff.
Yep.
She said, when I'm on the sideline with my kids, the former pro athletes are often the chillest.
Always. The best parent athletes are the most, they understand how narrow the pyramid is at the top and how long the road is.
And this is it. And I'll brag on my wife. My wife is a former professional runner who represented the U.S. at the World Half Marathon Championships. And we have this conversation, and she said to me, she said, you know what? People don't realize is like none of this extra stuff matters. If they are good enough,
Yep.
it will have to come from them within. If it's not there, if they don't want it, if it doesn't come from within, like they're not going to go through the training, the trials, the ups and downs
No.
to come
If you're
out the
doing
other
it to
side.
please your parents, at some point your parents hold on you when you go to college or whatever. It lessens.
Exactly. And this is, again, when I was a college coach, I coached alongside some of the greatest in history, Carl Lewis, Leroy Burrell. We'd have these conversations where we'd see the parent on the recruiting visit with the kid, and you'd say, and I remember Carl talking about this, he'd say, once that kid leaves that parent, that kid's not showing up to practice
Yep.
because that kid it's not coming from within. He's not invested. He shows up to practice because mom or dad like make sure he's there in high school. But once you go off into the real world or college, like you don't have that
You don't have the
overarching piece.
guardrails. Right.
Yeah. So
Can I pick one nit with you? It's
yeah,
not. I don't know if I believe this, but I want to make the devil's advocate argument because
sure.
you are right. Every professional athlete that I see interviewed says, "Let your kids play as many sports as possible." That's what I did. I'm old, but Cal Ripken is a great
Yeah.
example, right? Cal Ripken was like, he's like 6'4", 6'5", big guy. He played basketball in high school. He wasn't just a baseball kid. He wasn't on the team. This didn't exist back then, but they exist now. These travel teams that they're just fly-ins, tournaments. The only thing they have in common is that they're all extremely good at baseball, and that's all they do. But my pushback on that is, well, yeah, it worked for you because you're an elite athlete. So, like any coach, if my kid is like an Olympic level or a national team level soccer player, yeah, he misses a few practices because he's playing basketball. The coach is still going to be like, I mean, this kid is friggin' great. You know what I mean? Like, so that's what I always wonder about with these professional athletes because I think you're exactly right. They all say the same thing: play as many sports as possible. Don't specialize. The Roger Federer thing. He hated tennis growing up. Mom's a tennis coach, right? You've talked about that. Like, but like they have so many natural gifts. Is that like, yes, it works if you have elite level natural ability, but it is not like a broader, like for the rest of us, we need to specialize sooner. What do you make
Yes.
of that argument?
So that's a great question, and they've actually done. There's some research, not as much on this, but what it essentially says, if we look at projecting kind of potential and trajectories, okay, is if you specialize early, even if you're only gonna be, a pretty good, let's say, varsity type high
Yep.
school kid, or goes
Yep.
maybe D3, whatever it is, right? What happens is if you specialize early, your trajectory looks different than someone else who ends up in a similar place, kind of, um, which indicates probably a similar talent level,
Yep.
but your trajectory looks different. You tend to get pretty good early and then plateau. Okay.
Yes.
Well, the other person who, again, similar talent level, tends to get that like steady, relatively longer tail. And this, I think, is important because even if you're not going pro, even if you're not going to college, whatever, and you're just saying, hey, I want to get good at it, diversification of sports, especially early, is good because we can't predict the future. You have no idea what you're actually good at.
Yep.
So when I was in 6th grade, I thought soccer was my thing. I was pretty good at it. I played some travel soccer. I thought this is my future until I ran a really fast mile in 8th grade and then 9th grade,
Right.
and I was like, oh, never mind. It's like this looks brighter.
Well, it's like the kid who's the tallest sixth grader and is dominant in basketball, but then that was his growth spurt. Everybody else gets to be taller, and that's good. Like
Exactly.
who knows?
So
A guy a guy named Bruce Murray, who at one point he went to played soccer at Clemson, and at one point was the leading goal scorer in U.S. Soccer history, largely because it was the time in the '80s when we never scored. So like he had like 11 goals, but regardless, he coached my son when he was 8 or 9, so a long time ago, and he said something that I think of all the time. He said, "You know what? Until they hit puberty, you have no idea what you have." And it's like, man, that has been borne out. So it's so true. It's like you see these like soccer academies offering kids who are 8 years old, and it's like you have no idea what that kid is.
you have no idea. In soccer, it's the classic example of Freddie Adu. Like
14-year-old on DC United. Yep.
yeah, exactly. And it's just again biologically we have no clue what's going to happen to your development, how you're going to respond to puberty when you do, how you come out of that, both from girls and boys. It's the same thing. So like that's where there is no such thing as a elite 9-year-old in my head
Right. Right.
because who knows, right? If they hit puberty a little early, they're gonna look great. But guess what? Like someone else could have a late term growth spurt. So that's where I think again, and I would also say from a mental health standpoint, because what we know is that if you diversify your sports early or diversify your interests, guess what? It makes you a more robust person and like identity around things. If you
Yes.
specialize at 9 years old and you're saying, I'm going to be a basketball player, basketball is all that I care about. And, and then you don't get that growth spurt and you're, 5'7" trying to make the
Yep.
basketball team, your whole world is crushed because from the age of 9 to whatever 16, you thought basketball, basketball, basketball. And now you got to be like, well, what do I do? What else am I
Who
interested
am
in?
I?
Yeah,
Yeah.
who am I?
Can you? I want to talk about the book at the end. But can you? I have spent a lot of time diagnosing the problems with youth sports, which I think primarily are professionalization, money, and adults, which all go together. But you have offered sort of a way forward. Can you talk about like what do we need to do? And I
A
don't think
lot.
it's going to be easy. I mean, I see again. I was about rec basketball. It's like again, now in some way somebody said to me, I was telling them the story, and they said, sports in that way is like academia. The worst in people is brought out by the lowest stakes. You know what I mean? Like it's like when you're fighting over basically nothing, people are insane. When the stakes are higher, maybe a little less. But what do we do?
Yeah, so I think the model that we're never going to be completely, but gives us a good idea is Norway. Um,
Okay, one of
so
Donald Trump's favorite countries.
there you go. No, Norway is highly successful at the elite level, like Olympic, Winter Olympics dominate, but they have some great soccer, tennis, golfers, track and field.
Yep.
They've got some really great athletes all around. But if you look at their youth sports, what they do is a they don't allow you to keep score until I think it's like 12 or 13. You can keep score, but you can't publish it anywhere. Okay. There's no travel teams, meaning national travel teams, until 14 and above, I believe. Um, and then a whole bunch of other things that kind of limit things when you're essentially under high school age. And the point is to keep it more local and play based and like diversify and not specialize until you get to high school age where you can say, okay, I've tried all this stuff, we can do it. I think in the US, we're never going to convince people, hey, don't keep score. But what we can do is like move towards some of those ideas where we say, hey, instead of all these national travel tournaments, like let's return to a more local level.
Totally.
Let's
Just
make
one quick anecdote that makes your point. My 12-year-old plays on this travel baseball team, and they're pretty good. And the teams that they lose to I'll sometimes talk to the parents, and I say, like, how do you guys manage like the pitching with little league? This is less true now because he's out of little league, but when 9 to 12, and they'd be like, oh no, no, we don't play little league at all. We only do this because little league kids aren't good enough. It's a waste, which is exactly your point. It's like little league is something I not a great athlete, but I grew up with because it was community based,
Yeah.
right? It's like you go there. We got fields right down the street from me. Go there, hang out, see your friends, but it's like the professionalization of these kids is like, well, no, I mean, why would we waste it against someone who's not as good as him? It's like,
Yeah.
well, I mean, he's 9.
That's it, and that's it. We professionalized it. We need some sort of coming back to local and community and development and that path, and not like the hey, we're going to make money on some 9 year olds and the anxiety of parents. And I would also say, and you probably experienced this too, is if you ask the parents, no one wants to spend every single weekend traveling
Nope.
to
To
the middle
God
of
knows
nowhere.
where. Right.
Yes, to compete and watch some 9, 10, and 11-year-olds compete. They want to watch their kids play sports, but then they want to go home and have dinner with the family and allow the rest of the family to also do things. And
Totally.
I think that's what we have to get back to is like, how do we get some local community? How do we have some sort of like education? I've seen this really done really well in certain places. Swimming is starting to institute this on like parent education of like, hey, how do you help your kid? What does the data actually show on
Correct.
scholarships and development and stuff? Like, let's frame this. And they almost have like these parent education things before people even join the clubs. Now, are some parents always going to be nuts?
Of
Sure.
course.
But if we can minimize it and make it where it doesn't have to be all of us doing this because of someone's anxiety, I think we're in a better
Well, that's what
position.
happens, right? It's like keeping up with the Joneses. It's like, well, are
Yeah.
you doing winter hitting? Oh, well, then we should do winter. Are you doing winter pitching? Oh, then we should do winter. I mean, it's all of a. All right, I want to spend. I want to talk about the book. This is Steve's new book, by the way. Win the Inside Game. So I love. I mean, look, I'll be honest. The reason that I'm doing this is because I love what Steve does. So I mostly just selfishly wanted to talk to Steve for an hour, and thank you all for joining us in this. Why this? Right? For anyone who's never written a book, it always is a passion project because the way the book industry works now is unless you're Bob Woodward, you're probably not getting $1 million to write every book. So you're kind of like, I got to do something that I really love because it's going to be hard, right? It's kind of like we talk about sports, Steve. It's like you got to love it, you got to want to do it. So why this book? Why now? And then explain explain uh, the basic thesis for people. Give them the 5 minute pitch on why it's important, whether or not their kid is athletic, they are athletic. They're like, give us your elevator pitch, but a long elevator ride.
Yeah, got it. So I think we write the books that we need, and you're absolutely right. And I wrote this in order to write a book. You can't just wing it. You've got to have this deep desire and deep intrinsic motivation, or else you're going to give up because writing a book
Yes,
sucks.
totally.
I think why it is pretty simple. Is from youth sports, which I talk about in the book, to achievement and drive and success, which I talk about, to people like maybe not standing up for their values or having the courage to back their beliefs. What I realized as I looked around is when I said, these are all kind of the same thing. And I think I can contribute to this conversation to help people understand it. And my elevator pitch is this is that I start the book talking about choking, right? Choking in sport, which we
Yes,
talk about nervousness that where you can't come through. And the argument I make is that is we can use that framework to understand not just choking in sport, but why so many of us feel kind of lost, how we can't perform up to our potential, how like we keep getting in our own way or self-sabotaging. And the basic argument I make is because the world, we talked about local, the world feels like so global. we
yes,
can we're compared on everything. We can look around and find someone who is better at us, way better at us in just basically everything. we are more disconnected and lonely. Okay. Talking about that significance for men, it applies to men, women too. We feel a lack of significance. And when you combine all those things, what it does is it makes us choke at life. And my argument is that there is a better way where we can still strive to be great. We can still strive to understand our potential, but it doesn't mean like we need to double down on like, be obsessed or be average, burn all the boats, or like
Yep.
obsess over the outcome. What it means is, to me, in the book I make the argument is like we need clarity, meaning we need to know securely who we are, what matters, how we define success, and where we belong. And if you create that environment and create that space, what it does is it allows you to take risks. It allows you to play out of a or perform out of a place where you're seeing the tasks before you as a challenge instead of a threat to yourself, right? It's not, if I lose this game, like it's the end of my life, right? It's
Yep.
not that existential
Well,
threat.
what you were talking about with running,
Exactly.
either I win or I've existentially failed.
Right. And I would argue is like, so in the book I kind of make this argument, but like if you look at like social media, what it's done is it's put us all on a stage. We are
Yeah.
we are all on a stage, right? And what we know from sport to performance and creative acts is like there's a reason we don't choke in practice, right?
I was
No,
one of the greatest practice shooters the world has ever known in
right.
basketball.
Right. There's no pressure. There's no thing. But what we've done is we've eliminated any kind of no choke it, no pressure situations in practice because we've always on a stage, because we're always judged, because we're always putting stuff out there. And I think that's kind of made it where
That's
again
so interesting.
we live in
Yes.
this survival mode, so we can't perform up to our potential.
The other thing, and I just want to talk a little bit about this. You mentioned it, and I think about it with social media all the time. One of the things that I struggle with the most is I'm like, okay, I got laid off from CNN, 2 years ago. I built the Substack, I built a YouTube. I give paid speeches. I've done fine. And I'm like, there are days I get up, I'm like, I'm kicking ass. Like I added subscribers, momentum up and to the right, blah blah blah. And then I look over at Nate Silver's Substack, and he's got like 181,000 subscribers, and I'm like, oh, well, I guess I'm not as good as that. It's the comparison thing, and golly, social media just makes it. Because on social media, right, it's not like you're seeing somebody's real life; you're seeing their curated performance.
What we're
And
doing
like,
is
and that God, I struggle with that so much. It's like, I forget who said it, but the whole comparison is the thief of joy. My God, that's like the most apropos moment thought in this world we live in. Can you
yeah,
talk a little bit about that?
absolutely. It's driving us mad. And the reason is, again, if you think of those things, that significance, that coherence, that belonging, what did we understand? Where did we try to develop those things? Go back to the Savannah, it was on a local community. It was relatively easy to find something you were good at and you could contribute at when
Right.
there's like,
There weren't that many people.
yeah, there's 50 to 100 people. You're like, hey, I can cook all right. I can hunt. I
Totally.
can gather.
I'm taller than all the rest of these people.
Right.
Right.
But when we branch that out to where your literal comparison is one of the best in the world, if you go look at it, of course you're gonna feel kind of shitty. Of course your brain's gonna default. It's gonna say, your brain's gonna go, why try? What's the point? You're never gonna be
100%.
up to
I'm
that.
never going to be LeBron James.
Right. It is literally like if we had LeBron James at our middle school basketball, practice, and all the middle schoolers are like, I'm never gonna do that. Why am I
Right.
trying?
Why do anything?
Yeah. And that's how our motivation works. It needs to have hope. But how we get hope is a appropriate comparison. If I entered every race against the Olympic champion, I would have zero hope, and that's what we've kind of done to ourselves. So what I argue for in the book is and this is why outcomes have also driven us mad, because like our outcomes are so freaking high, right? Where
Correct.
we're
If you're not
chasing
the
them.
best, what's the point?
Yeah. So what we need to do is like, no, don't give up on like that competitiveness. The outcomes matter. Winning is all that matters. But we also have to bring in what I think, Adam Smith, the father of capitalism, put it
Yep.
as is like we need striving, but we also have to couple that. He said it with tranquility and contentment. Meaning, like, in order to not drive ourselves mad, we need some sort of balance over here to realize, like, yes, I'm playing this game to be the best Substack writer I can be,
Right.
but I've got to have something else in my life to allow me to take that edge off so that I don't drive myself mad. And I think in our current society where we are always connected, always online, always able to do something and work, and there are no constraints, if we don't set those constraints for ourselves, we're gonna go crazy.
I think of it all the time in terms of my wife and I talk about like, what if these are the golden years? Our kids live here. We have enough money to live. Everybody's healthy, knock on wood, right? Like, we're not in pain. We're not physically limited. It's like, it's sometimes you got to be like, this is the time of our lives. And I think we're so bad at that. You know what I mean? Because, like, look, I am more physically able now than I will be in 40 years. I mean, it's a fact, right? And yet, like, I feel like I spend so much time being like, if only I could get to 100,000 YouTube subscribers, then I'd be happy, right? It reminds me of wealth, right? It's like really wealthy people I know, they're like, I just wish I had my own plane. You know what I mean? Like, and the people with their own plane are like, I just wish the plane was bigger. Like, that's the thing. It's like it's unending.
Yeah.
It's
What
like there's no end. You're never like, you know, like, and that's the thing that I think is. It's like you said, tranquility and contentment. Like, you have to be able to find that along the route.
That's it. That's the goal there because it's like we're on a treadmill, right? And we keep thinking, oh, if I just walk a little faster, I'm going to get that thing. And that thing will always change. It never contents. And there's a good reason for it. Like, again, I use this example all the time, but go back to the savannah. The reason we're never content is because we needed to always be pushed to find the next food so that we
Correct. You
didn't
just like hang out at the rock you're at, you just die of starvation.
right.
Right.
So, like, our biology primes us, it's just not ready for the match of the world that we're in. And because, like, we're in this world where we can literally strive to death, we've
Yep.
got to be able to, again, we're not going to go, I'm not asking people to be a Zen master here. I'm,
Right.
I'm asking people to, like, make sure you have things in your life that diversify your sources of meaning that can give you some of that, like, non-chasing kind of like contentment. And those are often the times that also bring us into what the present, right? I don't know about you, but like when I'm playing with, I have young kids, but when I'm playing with my toddler daughter, I'm not thinking about my Substack
Nope.
subscribers because it
Nope.
forces me to be engaged in the moment, and we need things like that in order
The
to
happiest, the least worried I am in a given week is when I'm playing pickup basketball.
bingo.
And like, I'm not great at basketball. Do you know what I mean? I'm not like, if only an NBA scout were here. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's not that. It's the ability to just be in that moment and be like the camaraderie. You're moving, right? Like you're extra. Like, it's just that kind of thing. I think is so critical. And again, the stakes. It's. I mean, we keep score, but like, it doesn't really matter. Like, it's not like I've tabulated my yearly record in pickup basketball, but it's exactly what you're talking about.
And it reminds me, and I talk about this in the book, but one of my favorite studies I came across, which is they looked at Nobel Prize winning scientists. I mean, these are like the geniuses of the world. You win a
Totally.
Nobel, right?
Yes.
And they compared those Nobel winning scientists to those who were a couple rungs below. And the likelihood of the Nobel winning prize scientist to have some sort of hobby or leisure activity or creative outlet was something like 15 to 20 times higher than those scientists a rung or
It's
two
so
below.
interesting.
Because, and
You need an
again,
outlet.
it's an outlet. We tend to think, oh, these people are obsessed, they're all in, blah, blah. But here are the best of the best scientists, geniuses, and they had to have some sort of outlet for the exact reason that you're talking about basketball. not because they thought they were going to be the greatest, I don't know, knitter or whatever it was.
Gardener, right? Whatever, right?
Yeah, it's that they had to have an outlet, and that's what allowed them to be great.
I love it. Okay, so Steve is my favorite a nonfiction author. This is called Win the Inside Game. He's talked a little bit about it. I cannot recommend both this and Do Hard Things. Steve, that's your Do Hard Things was your previous
Yep,
book.
correct.
I have read Do Hard Things. I'm about halfway through Win the Inside Game. Steve, tell us the name of your Substack.
The Growth Equation newsletter.
The Growth Equation newsletter. I would recommend it to anyone who is interested in human nature and life, right? Which is most of us. Steve, anything else that SteveMagness.com for all of Steve's stuff, Magness. I can't thank you enough. I may, again, selfishly try to do another one of these with you in a few months because I want to do one specifically on youth sports and sort of where we go. I love the stuff about Norway. I want to go deeper into how we do this because it's just such a problem. And I think it creates so many downstream problems for our kids as they become teenagers and then young adults and then adults in terms of everything we've talked about, incentive structure, being happy doing something as opposed to achieving something. One thing we didn't even get into is you've written a lot about this. How we need unstructured play. Yep. Our kids are incapable of like just going out and playing. They need a referee and a coach, and that is not true across the world, right? I always, when people say like, why are kids in Brazil better at soccer? So they just go out and play.
Yep.
They're not like, I need to make the DC United Academy MLS next team. You know what I mean? That's not anyway. It's hugely fruitful. I am personally thankful because Steve, for people who don't know, has a 2-year-old and a 1-month-old. So Steve is taking Steve is in it, folks. He is in the mixer. So he took an hour out of his time. Thank your wife for us for letting you do this. And I'm gonna put this on my Substack. And anyway, I'm just hugely thankful for anyone who joins us live. Thank you for folks watching this after. Please check out Steve's stuff, the Growth Equation newsletter on Substack, as well as Win the Inside Game. Do it, people. You need to win the inside game. All right. Thank you, Steve.
Thanks so much.
All right, dude.
Take
You
care.
got it. Bye.